My name is Madeline, and I am 68 years old. For most of my life, I believed being generous was one of the best things a person could offer their family. I helped whenever someone needed me. I opened my home, paid bills when times were difficult, and rarely complained. I never imagined that one day my kindness would be mistaken for permission. That realization came on a quiet Tuesday morning. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of black tea when a notification appeared on my tablet. It was a message from a family group chat created by my daughter-in-law, Brianna. I opened it casually. Then I stopped breathing for a moment. Brianna had planned a 3-day family reunion for 20 people at my private beach house. Not suggested it, not asked about it, planned it. The entire itinerary had already been finalized. Everyone was supposed to arrive Friday afternoon, stay through the weekend, use the beach, barbecue every evening, and sleep wherever Brianna had decided to place them. My son, Cole, was also in the group chat. He hadn't objected. He hadn't even asked me. Then Brianna sent another message directly tagging me. She wanted me to stock the refrigerator with a long list of groceries before everyone arrived. She specified expensive steaks, organic snacks, drinks, breakfast foods, and even a particular imported beer her father liked. Then came the sentence that made everything suddenly clear. She had assigned my master bedroom to her parents. Apparently, I was expected to sleep in the smallest guest room in my own house. At the end of the message, she added a cheerful smiley face. I stared at the screen. There was no question. No, would this be okay? No, could we possibly stay? Just instructions. For years, I had quietly allowed Brianna to push boundaries. She had started by borrowing things. Then she began leaving belongings at my beach house. Eventually, she started inviting friends without checking with me and repeatedly asked for spare keys. Every time I complained, Cole defended her. She probably didn't mean anything by it, Mom. Just let it go. It will keep the peace. I had listened because I loved my son, but sitting at that kitchen table, I finally understood something painful. Keeping the peace had required me to sacrifice my own. The beach house was not some random vacation property. My husband and I had dreamed about owning it for years. After he passed away, I kept it because it became my sanctuary. I had worked for 35 years as a school administrator to afford that kind of peace. And now Brianna had decided that 20 people could simply move into it for a weekend. I set my tea down. I didn't argue. I didn't call Cole. I didn't send Brianna an angry paragraph. Instead, I packed a small overnight bag, took my purse, and drove toward the coast. The 3-hour drive gave me plenty of time to think. I wasn't furious. I was tired. For years, I had helped Cole and Brianna financially. I had contributed to their wedding, helped them secure their first home, and quietly covered expenses whenever they complained about money. Only recently, Brianna had complained about their expensive phone plans and streaming services while repeatedly looking at me across the dinner table. I had understood the hint. I had paid them. That evening, I realized my generosity had become an expectation. At a highway rest stop, I opened my banking app. I canceled the automatic payments for their streaming services. Then I removed Cole as an authorized user from my primary credit card. My hands were surprisingly steady. This wasn't revenge, it was a boundary. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. Brianna had already texted me. "Have you left for the grocery store yet? My dad really needs that imported beer." I stared at the message. Then I turned my phone face down. For the first time in years, I wasn't preparing to make someone else's life easier. I was preparing to protect my own. And when I finally reached the beach house, I knew the next step would be even simpler. They had planned to enter my home without permission. I was going to make sure they couldn't. I arrived at the beach house just before noon. The coastal air was crisp, carrying the familiar smell of salt and pine. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. Immediately, I noticed the evidence of Brianna's last uninvited visit. A pair of sandals had been kicked beneath the entryway table. 3 empty sunscreen bottles covered the bathroom counter, and a beach towel was still hanging over a chair. She had treated my home like a hotel. There had never been a checkout time because, in her mind, there had never been a need for one. I walked into the kitchen and set down my bag. For a moment, I simply stood there. This house had always been my sanctuary. I remembered the first time my husband and I had walked through it together, laughing about where we would put the furniture. Years later, after his death, the house had become the place where I could finally hear my own thoughts. I wasn't going to let anyone turn it into a family resort. I grabbed a heavy-duty trash bag and walked through the rooms. Brianna's sandals went inside, so did the empty bottles and the forgotten beach hat she had left behind. I didn't carefully organize her belongings. I didn't make a special place for them. I simply removed the things that didn't belong in my home. Then I walked toward the front door. 2 years earlier, Cole had installed an electronic keypad lock. At the time, he had told me it would make things easier for everyone. That had been the problem. It had made everything too easy for everyone except me. I opened the lock's control panel on my phone. One by one, I deleted every saved access code. Then I created a new master code known only to me. Finally, I disabled the remote unlock feature. No one would be opening this door from a phone. No one would be letting themselves inside while I was away. I was the owner. I was the one who would decide who entered. There was still one problem. The garage side door used a traditional deadbolt, and Cole had a spare key. I called a local handyman I trusted. He arrived within 40 minutes. He replaced the deadbolt, tested it twice, and handed me the only 2 keys. I paid him, thanked him, and watched him drive away. For the first time in years, every entrance to my house was under my control. I made myself a fresh cup of coffee and carried it onto the back deck. The ocean stretched endlessly beyond the railing. I took a slow sip, then I opened my laptop. If I was going to set boundaries, I needed to look at every place where I had allowed them to cross mine. I checked my household finances. That's when I found something that hurt more than I expected. There were recent withdrawals from the joint savings account Cole and I had maintained for years. The money had been used to cover payments connected to Brianna's expensive car lease, thousands of dollars. I stared at the transactions for several seconds. Cole hadn't asked me. He hadn't mentioned them. He had simply taken money from an account we had built together. I felt the familiar sting behind my eyes, but I didn't cry. Crying wouldn't change what had happened. So I acted. I transferred the remaining balance into an individual account under my name. I left exactly $5 in the joint account. The account could remain open. But the money would no longer be available for someone else's lifestyle. My phone buzzed. The family group chat was filling with photographs. Brianna had sent pictures of premium steaks, drinks, and bags of groceries she expected me to buy. Her mother replied with a message thanking me in advance for my hospitality. I almost laughed. They were thanking me for hosting an event I had never agreed to. I muted the group chat. I didn't leave. I wanted every message preserved. I wanted the record of their demands. Most importantly, I didn't want them to know how quiet the house had become. That evening, I cooked myself grilled salmon and asparagus. I ate at the dining table with the windows open. No shouting, no demands. No people walking through my rooms without asking, just the sound of the ocean. Later that night, my phone began vibrating again. Brianna was calling. I let it ring. Then came a long text. She wanted to know why I hadn't sent her a photograph of the refrigerator. She reminded me that her father needed his imported beer. She mentioned organic snacks for the children. Then she wrote something that made me smile. Please stop dragging your feet. Everyone is depending on you. Everyone. Apparently, 20 people were depending on a woman they hadn't even bothered to ask. I typed one sentence. I am not buying groceries today. Her response arrived almost immediately. What does that mean? I didn't answer. I walked into my bedroom instead. Brianna had already assigned this room to her parents, so I unpacked my suitcase. I placed my favorite books on the nightstand. I folded my clothes into the dresser. Then I climbed into my own bed. For the first time, I wasn't preparing to surrender my space. I was reclaiming it. A few minutes later, Cole called. I answered. Mom, he said nervously, Brianna says you're upset about the groceries. I am not hosting a reunion. There was silence. But everyone is coming tomorrow. I know. Can't you just do this one thing? I closed my eyes. Cole wasn't asking what I wanted. He was asking me to make his life easier. Cole, I said quietly, this is my house. I never agreed to host 20 people. I am not buying groceries, and I am not giving up my bedroom." He sighed. "Mom, please don't make this difficult." I looked out the window at the dark ocean. "I didn't make it difficult," I said. "Brianna made plans without asking me." Then I ended the call. The boundary had finally been spoken aloud. Tomorrow, they would arrive expecting an open door. They had no idea what was waiting for them. Friday morning arrived with a brilliant golden sunrise. I woke up feeling strangely rested. For once, there was no reason to rush. I didn't have to clean the floors for 20 unexpected guests. I didn't need to drive to the grocery store for food I hadn't chosen. I didn't need to arrange towels, prepare beds, or worry about whether everyone would behave respectfully in my home. I made a pot of strong coffee and sat beside the large living room window. From there, I could see the driveway. Brianna had told everyone they should arrive around 2 in the afternoon. I knew because I had read every message in the family group chat. They had planned everything: beach chairs, coolers, barbecue supplies, seating arrangements. Dinner menus, there was only one thing they hadn't planned: my permission. At 10 that morning, my phone buzzed. An automated notification from my credit card company appeared on the screen. A transaction had been declined. I opened the alert. It was a gas station charge. Cole had apparently tried to use the credit card I had canceled the previous day. A few minutes later, his message arrived. "Mom, my card isn't working. Is there some kind of fraud alert?" I stared at the screen. For years, I would have immediately apologized. I would have fixed the problem. I would have told him there must have been a mistake. Instead, I typed the truth. "No fraud alert. I removed you as an authorized user. You'll need to use your own card from now on." I sent it, then I placed my phone on the table. No explanation, no apology, no argument. I had spent too many years solving problems that belonged to grown adults. The rest of the morning was peaceful. I watered the plants. I dusted the bookshelves. I played soft jazz through the living room speakers. I even opened the windows and let the ocean breeze move through the house. Everything felt different. The house hadn't changed. I had. Around noon, I checked the family chat one last time. The messages were coming rapidly. Brianna had posted photographs of cars packed with luggage. Her relatives were excited. Someone had written that the beach house looked incredible. Another person thanked Brianna for arranging such a beautiful weekend. I almost felt sorry for them. They had no idea that the entire plan was built on a lie. They believed Brianna had access to my home. She didn't. They believed she had permission. She didn't. They believed I was waiting inside to welcome them. I wasn't. At exactly 2:15 p.m., I heard the first vehicle. I walked toward the window. A large silver SUV entered the driveway. A minivan followed. Then came Cole's Suburban. I stood behind the sheer curtains. Brianna stepped out of the SUV wearing designer sunglasses and carrying a large beach bag. She looked completely confident. She pointed toward the house and began directing everyone. Her parents stepped out of the minivan. They stretched, looked toward the ocean, and smiled. They seemed pleased with the accommodations they believed they had received. Cole got out of his vehicle last. He looked exhausted. Even from a distance, I could tell he wasn't comfortable. Brianna, however, seemed thrilled. She walked straight toward the front door. She didn't knock. She didn't hesitate. She simply entered the old keypad code. The lock flashed red. A sharp electronic beep followed. Brianna frowned. She tried again. Red light. Another beep. Her confidence expression disappeared. She turned toward Cole. "Did you change the code?" Cole shook his head. He walked toward the garage entrance and pulled a key from his pocket, his spare key. He inserted it into the new deadbolt. He turned. Nothing happened. He tried again. Still nothing. I watched quietly from inside. The first signs of confusion spread through the group. Brianna's father approached. "What is taking so long?" Brianna ignored him. She pulled out her phone. Then she called me. My phone began vibrating on the kitchen counter. I watched her name appear on the screen. Brianna. I didn't answer. The call ended. Seconds later, she called again. I ignored it. Then again and again. Finally, she walked to the front door and began pounding on it. "Madeline!" Her voice echoed across the driveway. "Open the door!" I remained silent. Madeline, I know you're in there! The people standing behind her looked increasingly uncomfortable. Some had begun unloading luggage. Now they stopped. Brianna turned around and shouted something at Cole. He looked helpless. Then my phone rang again. This time I answered. Madeline! Brianna shouted immediately. What is going on? I kept my voice calm. The locks are changed. What? The locks are changed, Brianna. She stared at the door. You can't do this. We have 20 people here. You planned a reunion at my house without asking me. There was silence. Then she raised her voice. My family drove for hours. I understand. Where are we supposed to stay? That isn't my responsibility. You knew we were coming. No, I said. I knew you were planning to come. I never agreed. She began shouting again. I listened for several seconds. Then I said the words I had been waiting years to say. Brianna, you do not own this house. Silence. You don't control me, I continued. And you don't get to decide who stays here. She breathed heavily into the phone. Open the door. No, Madeline. No, Brianna. I looked through the window. 20 people were standing outside the home they had assumed belonged to them for the weekend. Then I said quietly, have a safe drive home. And I ended the call. The moment I ended the call, the house became completely silent. Outside, however, everything had changed. Brianna stood frozen on the porch, staring at her phone as if she couldn't understand what had just happened. Her parents were asking questions. Her siblings were looking at each other. The children had stopped running toward the beach. Nobody seemed to know what to do. I remained behind the curtains, watching quietly. Brianna finally turned toward Cole. What did your mother do? Cole didn't answer immediately. He looked toward the locked door, then back at his wife. She changed the locks. I know that. Then what do you want me to do? Brianna's face tightened. You're her son. Make her open the door. Cole looked defeated. For years, he had been able to persuade me to give in. He had relied on my love for him. But this time, there was nothing left to negotiate. The door was locked. The decision was made. Brianna's father stepped closer. Wait, he said. You told us this house was available. Brianna turned toward him. It is. He pointed at the door. Then why can't we get inside? She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Her mother looked confused. You said your mother gave you permission. I thought she would. Her father's expression changed. You thought? The embarrassment on Brianna's face was obvious. She had invited 20 people based entirely on an assumption that my silence meant agreement. Her father shook his head. This is unbelievable. Brianna immediately tried to shift the blame. She is being difficult. I almost laughed when I heard that. Difficult. That was what people called you when you finally stopped doing what they wanted. Cole's mother was difficult because she refused to surrender her bedroom. Difficult because she wouldn't buy groceries for 20 people. Difficult because she expected to be asked before someone used her property. I walked away from the window. I didn't need to watch every second. The truth was already doing the work for me. A few minutes later, I heard engines starting. I returned to the window. The family was packing everything back into their vehicles. Beach chairs disappeared into trunks. Coolers were loaded. Suitcases were dragged across the driveway. Brianna's mother looked furious. Her father barely spoke to her. The people who had arrived expecting a luxurious free weekend now had to find somewhere else to stay. The first vehicle slowly backed out, then another. Finally, Cole's Suburban remained. Brianna stood beside it with her arms crossed. She looked toward my house one last time. I could see the anger on her face even through the glass. Then she got into the passenger seat. Cole started the engine. Before leaving, he looked toward the house. For a moment, our eyes met through the window. I couldn't tell whether he looked angry, ashamed, or simply exhausted. Then the car disappeared down the road. I closed the curtain, and that was it. No shouting, no police, no lawyers, no dramatic confrontation, just a locked door. For the first time in years, I felt completely peaceful. The weekend passed quietly. I read 3 books. I took long walks along the shoreline. I cooked simple meals. I slept better than I had in months. There were no unexpected guests. No one demanded anything. No one told me where I should sleep in my own home. The silence wasn't lonely. It was freedom. By Monday morning, I finally turned my phone back on. There were dozens of missed calls. Most were from Brianna, several were from Cole. I ignored Brianna's messages and opened Cole's. His first message was short. "Mom, I'm sorry." I kept reading. He admitted that he had known Brianna was planning the reunion. He admitted that he had never asked me because he knew I might say no. That sentence hurt more than anything else. He hadn't misunderstood. He had avoided asking because he already knew the answer. Another message followed. "I should have stopped her." Then another. "I let you down." I placed the phone on the table. For years, I had told myself that Cole was simply caught between his wife and his mother. Now I understood the truth. He had made a choice. He chose silence because silence was easier. His silence had allowed Brianna to become bolder, and my silence had allowed both of them to believe I would always give in. That was the part I needed to change. I picked up the phone again. I wrote one message. "I accept your apology, but things will not go back to the way they were." I stopped, then added, "You will need to earn my trust again." I sent it. For several minutes there was no response, then the phone buzzed. "I understand, Mom." I read those 3 words twice. They weren't enough to repair everything, but they were a beginning. I walked outside with my coffee and sat on the deck. The morning sun reflected across the ocean. The house was quiet. My house, my rules, my peace. And for the first time, I understood that setting a boundary hadn't destroyed my family. It had simply revealed who respected me enough to stay. The days after the reunion were quieter than I expected. Cole didn't visit. Brianna didn't call me directly. For nearly a week, there was only silence. At first, I thought the silence meant they were angry. Then I realized something else. They were finally learning that I wasn't going to chase them. For years, whenever there was tension, I had been the one to call first. I had apologized when I wasn't wrong. I had offered money when nobody asked politely. I had invited them over even after being treated poorly. I had convinced myself that keeping everyone happy was the same thing as keeping everyone close. It wasn't. Sometimes keeping everyone happy only teaches them that your feelings don't matter. One afternoon, I sat at my desk and reviewed my finances again. I wanted everything completely separate. The joint account had already been reduced to $5. My credit cards were secure. The automatic payments were canceled. But there was one more thing I needed to address. I had been paying several household expenses for Cole and Brianna for years. Their streaming subscriptions, a phone bill, a few insurance payments, even occasional grocery deliveries. None of these payments were large enough to feel important individually. Together, they had become another invisible obligation. I canceled everyone. There was no anger behind it. I simply decided that 2 adults with jobs should manage their own household expenses. That evening, Cole finally called. I almost didn't answer, but I did. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Cole." There was a long pause. "How are you?" "I'm fine." "I've been thinking about everything." "So have I." He exhaled. "Brianna is still angry." "I expected that." "She says you embarrassed her in front of her family." I looked out the window. "She embarrassed herself when she invited 20 people to someone else's house." Cole didn't respond. After a few seconds, he said, "You're right." Those 2 words surprised me. "You're right, Mom." I sat quietly. "I should have asked you," he continued. "Actually, I should have stopped the whole thing. Yes, I knew she hadn't asked." That sentence made my stomach tighten. "You knew?" "Yes." He sounded ashamed. "She told me she was organizing everything, and I just assumed you'd go along with it." I closed my eyes. There it was, the truth I had needed to hear. My son hadn't misunderstood me. He had underestimated me. He believed my love would always overpower my boundaries. "Cole," I said, "do you know what hurt the most?" "What?" "You didn't think I deserved to be asked." He was silent, I continued. "You knew I might say no. So you didn't give me the chance to say yes or no. You simply let Brianna make the decision." "I know, no. I don't think you do." My voice remained calm. "You weren't protecting your wife from conflict. You were protecting yourself from discomfort." He didn't argue. That silence told me everything. Finally, he said, "You're right." I appreciated that he didn't make excuses, but an apology wasn't enough. "I love you," I said. "That hasn't changed." "I love you too, Mom. But loving you doesn't mean I will keep allowing this." "I understand." "Good. We ended the call a few minutes later. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 2 days later, there was a knock at my front door. I looked through the window. It was Cole, alone. I opened the door but didn't step aside immediately. He looked nervous. "Can I come in?" I nodded. He walked inside slowly. The first thing he did was look around. The house was exactly as it had been before the reunion, clean, quiet, peaceful. He looked toward the hallway. "This is really beautiful." It always was. He lowered his eyes. "I know." We sat in the living room. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then Cole reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small object. He placed it on the coffee table. It was his spare key. "I don't want this anymore," he said. I looked at it. "You don't have to give it back because you're ashamed." "I'm not." He looked directly at me. "I'm giving it back because I understand now." I picked up the key. For years, that little piece of metal had represented trust. Now it represented something different, a boundary. "I appreciate this," I said. Cole nodded. Then he asked, "Do you think someday I can bring Brianna here?" I considered the question carefully. "Someday, perhaps." His expression softened. "But only when I invite you." He nodded. "And no one else comes without asking." "Exactly." He smiled faintly. "Fair enough." After he left, I stood at the front door for a long time. The house was quiet again. But this time, the quiet felt different. It no longer felt like distance. It felt like control. I had spent years believing boundaries would push my family away. Instead, they were forcing everyone to finally see me clearly. Not as a wallet, not as a free hotel, not as someone who would always surrender to avoid conflict. I was their mother. I was a grandmother. I was a person. And my kindness was something I chose to give. It was never something they were entitled to take. Several weeks passed after Cole returned the spare key. Life settled into a rhythm I hadn't experienced in years. I spent my mornings walking along the shoreline. I read in the afternoons. Sometimes I sat on the deck with coffee and watched the waves until sunset. The beach house felt different now. Not because the furniture had changed, not because the locks were new. Because I finally understood that peace wasn't something I needed to earn from other people. It was something I was allowed to protect. Cole slowly began rebuilding our relationship. He called before visiting. He asked instead of assuming. When he wanted to bring something to the beach house, he checked with me first. Small things, but important things. Brianna remained distant. I didn't chase her. I didn't demand an apology. I didn't send angry messages. If she needed time, she could have it. One Saturday morning, however, Cole called with an unexpected question. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Would you be willing to meet Brianna?" I looked toward the ocean. "Where? She wants to apologize." I was quiet for a moment. "Does she understand why?" "Yes, or does she just want the situation to go away?" "I think she understands. I didn't promise anything." "Let me think about it." A week later, I agreed to meet them at a small cafe near my home. Brianna was already seated when I arrived. She looked different, not physically. Emotionally, the confidence she usually carried was gone. She stood when she saw me. "Madeline." I nodded. "Brianna." We sat across from each other. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she finally said, "I owe you an apology. I waited. I was wrong about the beach house." "That isn't quite enough," I said. She swallowed. "You're right." I leaned back. "You didn't just make a mistake. You made a decision about my property without asking me." "I know. You told 20 people they could stay there." "I know. You assigned my bedroom to your parents." Her eyes lowered. "I know. And you expected me to buy the food." I was entitled. "The honesty surprised me," she continued. "I had gotten used to you helping us. Every time we needed something, you said yes. I stopped seeing your generosity as a gift. I didn't interrupt. I started seeing it as something I could count on. There it was. The truth." I nodded slowly. "That is exactly what happened." She looked at me. "I am sorry." This time, I believed her. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. "Brianna," I said, "I forgive you." Her shoulders relaxed slightly. "But things will be different." She nodded. "I understand. You will never use the beach house without my permission." "I won't. You won't have access codes." "I understand. And you won't make financial decisions for me." "I would never do that again." I smiled faintly. "I hope not." For the first time, she smiled too. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. It didn't erase everything. But it was honest. Sometimes honesty is a better foundation than pretending nothing happened. After the meeting, Cole drove me home. Before I got out of the car, he said, "I'm proud of you, Mom." I laughed softly. "Why? Because you finally stood up for yourself." I looked at him. "No, Cole," he frowned. "What?" "I finally stopped being afraid of disappointing people." He smiled. "I think that's better." It is. That evening, I returned to the beach house. I walked through every room slowly, the living room, the kitchen, the hallway, my bedroom. Everything was quiet. I stepped outside onto the deck. The sunset painted the ocean in shades of gold and orange. I thought about the day 20 people had stood outside my locked door. At the time, I had believed the lock was the solution. Now I understood it wasn't. The lock had simply been a symbol. The real change had happened inside me. I had finally realized that kindness without boundaries can become a burden. Generosity without respect can become exploitation. And love without limits can teach people to take you for granted. I hadn't changed the locks because I hated my family. I changed them because I loved myself enough to stop allowing disrespect. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Cole. "Love you, Mom." I smiled. I typed back, "Love you too." Then I put the phone away. The ocean was quiet. The evening breeze moved gently through the trees. I picked up my coffee and watched the waves. The beach house was mine. The choices were mine. The keys were mine, and so was my peace. If there is one thing I learned from that weekend, it is this. You don't have to scream to establish a boundary. You don't have to threaten anyone. You don't have to explain yourself 100 times. Sometimes, all you need to do is stop opening the door for people who never bothered to knock, because the moment you realize your kindness is being treated like an obligation, you have every right to close the door, not out of cruelty, not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. And sometimes, a locked door teaches a lesson that years of polite words never could.